Are you on witness protection?
Am I a witness protection? Yes.
So why are you here in public if you're
Because
No one would ever suspect us of anything. They think we're a bunch of.
that's right.
You have to learn the newly anointed name of the awards that I will give away this morning. The award is called the Enchanted Duplicator.
Very nice.
I can tell you it's raining outside.
Welcome to the final official part of Corflu 36, in which for at least 45 minutes to an hour, we don't do anything except eat, and before we get bored by all of the official program items. They have gotten the food set up early, so we're in good shape on that front. So what we'll do in order to keep the narrow hall from getting too crowded is we will go by tables. I recommend that you go out this door because the plates, you will hit those first. You can take them without the plate if you like, but the mess is your problem. Then you will go ahead and fill up and then come in this door. And the coffee service is where the registration table would be, so that should do it. We will then just see how quickly people go through breakfast, and then we'll figure out from there when to start the rest of the formal program. Thank you very much. Everybody having a good time? That's good. When I took over, when I decided to run Corflu, the one thing that gave me comfort from the very first is that having been to enough of them, the only thing I ever notice is if there are enough people around that I want to talk with and have a good time, and none of the other stuff matters. And therefore, I said, you know what? I can't screw this up too badly. So if you got enough people to talk to, and we've got you well lubricated, then we're so glad. All right, so go ahead, and we'll start with back table. Victor, if you'll need the.
They can't be well lubricated. There's no rules.
not even mimosa?
I'll point you. For the moment, I'm going to let people watch.
What does he?
No, but watch people go out and help them.
Another feature that program
But in the past, they have expectations of people.
on the internet. Well, there's a select group of
We will take the sex table here.
Another unique to Corflu is going to be somebody who is going to president human writers association. Vice President human writers.
That's what everyone.
Ted White will explain this. Because you are the past president, your term is over and you have no duties. Probably a typical Corflu in terms of number of people showing up.
Come every year.
Well,
I've been a regular. My first one was 2001. I skipped 2 or 3 years, but I've come every year since. Wherever it is, it moves. Last year it was in Toronto, which is convenient because they live next door in Mississauga.
That's right, there's a problem. There's a black hole.
Mississauga is the city next door to Toronto.
Yeah, we've got short rain.
If you fly from here, the Pearson
And it took
actually in Toronto.
I'll bring another plate and split it up. Coffee. Yeah, it's supposed to be.
Well,
This door.
Okay, I'll wait for you. Just start eating.
Too many people in here.
Somehow.
My son is a member of it.
I read some of the grits are coming back.
He doesn't really like road
What's his name?
David Lupton.
Okay.
He makes a good
You have to make a certain minimum number of sales. Professional sales.
we'll let you go as soon
Yeah, we can. Want to make sure I've got space for that. Cheers, yeah. Well, there's some in it's not actually much of an improvement.
Not yet, anyway.
We drove here. We left home on Monday morning and we stopped overnight in Tuna. And driving south was like a day-long time to go to bed. And when we left home, we have no room prices. We still have daffodils.
Well, we'll see what the weather's like, whether the daffodils got open and they're done yet. Well, we lost our daffodils like 2 weeks
once
ago.
it's done, someone will get you.
I've had one. I watched one. Well, we had a really nice time around Altoona. Yeah, the red beds were still out. On the trees. Except that that wakes up you, so I'm happy.
Usually I can't help myself.
Right. Well, maybe you're slugging that.
You're trying to get to the scrape off. This is an experiment. It's salmon and cheese.
Well, that's certainly interesting.
That chair's not taken.
No, it's not taken.
That's Colleen's coat. Colleen's here.
Oh, I didn't know you about your bag.
I really
You just shouldn't sit in front of the camera.
Well, I think,
That's fine.
Rob is moving the camera accordingly. So he's a speaker there, he will rearrange it.
Kind of a good.
Well,
It's okay.
If there were a table of towns there, that would be a good direction.
Before, you're not on some kind of witness protection.
That could be, but he knows I'm in.
Blue, I recommend that. So, I'm sure you can some of the cheese.
So I had.
I've never. I never thought of salmon and cheese.
We have salmon
Yeah.
every Friday. Well, they do.
There's a few surviving Catholics who aren't Jewish. So, these visionary videos you're making in their stunning clarity, where do they appear? The person I've used as the kind of bellwether for kind of confidentiality and storage and posterity issues, archiving, is Spike. And I've had a good conversation with Spike yesterday. She's actually now okay with them being put on. The links will go on Corflu.org now. Yeah. And it'll be all, as always, on the Eternal Library of YouTube. Yes, that's what I mean. There will be links to the YouTube, URLs. Yeah, it's amazing how much traffic there is. I mean, I did an evening with Reeve and Dyson in January at UCSD. And it's got something pushing 4,000 views. There were only 600 people. But there's just a lot of people who look, they go various interest groups and they watch the videos. Yeah. I hardly watch any videos.
Yeah, I saw the footage this morning. Something was going on.
Yes, he is. I think we put it in.
Yes.
Yes, well, only three actually. I don't know. Is there somebody here? Oh, is that who's in? It's the Colin. Yeah.
I don't know. But how can you do it?
Well,
Photograph
at most
yourself.
time before the place,
I don't know.
like more than the internet.
Yeah, but it's all stupid. There's no evidence for that at all.
Yeah, but that doesn't
The thing that bothers me is that even in first class, they typically don't have the power plugs in or on American Airlines. And the stewardess said, well, the power plugs, I think there's one here and I think it's down there. Yeah, really what you
Well, yeah, we can do that.
He doesn't even know where the ear is.
The chairs over there, you see.
Oh, there are chairs.
Yeah.
Michael?
For those of you who have believed, my wife for 35 years was missionary.
Michael.
Did you say she was here?
She just came in.
If you walk faster, you can keep.
Oh, right.
Get blocked by several larger big objects. Well, I use opaque only. To as many meetings. So, has anything happened in the world while we've been paying attention to it? I'm always afraid of stop paying attention.
No, for the first time I can say it, I don't recall anything out of the ordinary. Yes. I don't even remember the sports right at the moment. I don't think there was any.
Derby was running yesterday.
Oh, that is a scandal. Yeah.
What is?
The second place winner won.
Well,
Where?
didn't Kentucky Derby.
Yeah.
How? Second down?
Yes, after the fact. Bush heard there was something about.
Block the access.
Yeah.
Which I don't understand. I think that would be
Does that
fair.
mean?
Well, I guess there was no way he could get by.
Right, but I thought that would not be a, I mean, that's
Oh,
just
isn't that horse racing?
yes. I don't know. I what they said. What is it? The name is a bizarre name too, of the horse that won. My neighborhood has a huge Kentucky Derby party. It takes up like what he has to go over for blocks. No, I don't.
She lives in some horrible place.
Alexandria.
Yeah,
Alexandria.
but not the really good
Not the Egyptian one.
The name of the horse was something security or
Homeland Security.
Homeland Security. Well, something I have my phone, but okay, it's really urgent. But it was, yes, that was the biggest.
You guys don't mind if I put a chair right here, do you?
If you like.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That table, yeah, you can.
they will be last.
You know, Mike Resnick is a huge racehorse fan, and he used to bet a lot
Yes.
until he learned that he was losing. So,
Yeah, well,
Thank you, because from the back wall,
he usually sends side enough.
eyesight's so poor, I might as well be facing the wall.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. So you're going back here after the.
Those
coming
of
back
you
down
asking
here
about
after a
salt
meal.
and
I'm
pepper,
skipping the meal.
it is one of those modern camouflage salt and pepper shakers. They are in the main food area. If you like if you want some,
Outside the door, so
that cover there.
we're last.
Well, yes, I think so.
But there's only 4 of us.
Yeah, well, that's right, yes. Yeah,
Oh, were
yes.
we supposed to go by table?
Yeah, we were.
Well,
This is not a group that typically follows.
yes, I noticed that.
Well, Murray and Mary Ellen and I are obviously conformists.
He didn't say it loud enough. fast
And
enough.
let me double check. I think you are.
We're last.
Go on.
Okay.
Yeah. Go on. So that's all good.
Oh. Sorry, Michael, I didn't hear you.
In all such events, I always just get up and leave as soon as they start the announcement. Because I know it will be 7 or 8 sentences, so by that time I will have food.
Food and you're gone. But because it's cold otherwise. You know what? It's cold. What did you? I said, no, it's cold food. Otherwise, it's cold. I'm sure to get there.
This is good.
I just live in the.
Yeah, that's the way. Why is that wrong?
Sometimes so other people. I remember as a freshman at university when I realized that was smart to sit up front. I just remember you and your smart ass questions. You're not follow them because you're right there.
I'm a professor.
No, I said, I realized it was better to sit in front of class and ask questions and be noticed.
Yes.
Somebody's going to have to write your list of recommendations.
Exactly. That's what I had a colleague. So crazy because every time we went anywhere to see, they would make us sit in front of all of us, Ricky.
It's called prominence, advertising.
Well, one of the reasons, if you had to speak, you didn't see it. I was a little nervous to do at it.
My son,
Well, I can't see back there.
my son is very good. High school. Before high school.
Good, it's hard in high school.
Yes, but he was in high school. It was harder.
Yeah, it is harder. Yeah, oh, he didn't speak.
Shelley and everything.
All right, so anyway, the teacher told him to stop answering all the questions.
So he started asking them.
So she said, you can only ask a question and nobody else is getting the answer.
Well, that must have made him a lot of friends. Smart ass American. What is he doing here anyway? Maybe the lunches in there will shoot him. I'm just trying to think in terms of the other people.
I heard there was a
Always
lot.
think about it.
Yes, of course. What was it, I heard the play, there was a lot of improv at the play.
Yes, but me,
Why am I not surprised?
Smart ass.
Yes.
Well, one of the characters was playing a Frenchman, right? So I unloaded my customary cargo of French jokes in the middle of what was supposed to be a plot, but apparently wasn't. And there's educational reach for some of those people. Gonzalez trying to imitate a French intellectual.
So I didn't know.
Right, exactly. But that's a contradiction in terms.
No. Leonard looked like that one.
Yeah, it actually did. I would say, the little Well, if I had put the whole thing on the spreadsheet, I could have just done it all. It worked really well at the auction and I went to yeah. No, and there was a double check.
Drinking a lot of coffee because they don't need
Didn't mean we had to sit.
I guess those are the
Quite well.
certificates and the awards.
It's either a slightly misdesigned monolith or they want to heighten the suspense in the room by making it mysterious. I don't know if this one works.
Yeah, I don't know. He was waiting for Kurt. Oh dear.
Eggy is and Eggy does.
Yeah.
The egg and salmon is wonderful.
I heard.
What are you eating?
No, I ate the veggie. I should try that. At some point, but not yet.
Colleen, you look very good on bars.
Really?
Hey, grasp it.
Come right out.
It's your only chance at immortality.
Oh dear.
Flip over the. And notice it's your coat and your chair.
Yes. Yeah, but
You are.
yes, but that's what it's over there.
It should point someplace
Absolutely. Any questions? I'm sorry, one last thing.
Someone said, do you want us to do a full rehearsal at the award ceremony? And I said, you were great.
Why did you want to do that? Yeah.
Excuse me, Greg, do you have any questions about what we're going to be doing?
You do the preliminary, and I do the winner.
You've done this sort of thing before.
Yeah, sure.
So standard stuff is, maybe this is what you do.
Yes, that's right. I have
Let me see.
If you can write timescape, you can do that.
true enough. You can rewrite it.
There you go.
That's a part. Yes, that's why I used to just put the word rewrite into everything. But it's true because rewrite is a thematic sequence of timescape. Come on, it's even got Einstein in it. So, and it's sold very well.
For anybody who got screwed on the egg department, more eggs will be here shortly. So if you missed that, I will let you know when they're here and the wrapping board is
Pornographic rendering got screwed in the egg department. You're kind of reaching for that metaphor.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just remember an incident about 30 years ago. It was at an award. It was being given to searching for
To be determined. Pat Verzi, to be determined. Pat told me she's not involved.
all right, so I walked into a luncheon and somebody.
You didn't put it there.
Oh, yes.
Maybe Kurt did.
Well, tell her she needs to hear another rap.
Okay.
This is presenting on Don's
Yes, I have too. The same thing.
Right. So I had just had major surgery on my left knee. I was walking with a cane, maybe more years ago, and walking with a cane and an open wound on my knee with a big bandage. Okay, you think normal people would accept that this was not a good time. Somebody introduced us. My son decided to mentor.
37 degrees centigrade. I think, are they trying to make it seem not hot by putting it in centigrade?
Tell your son all about it. So then he sat down next to me and grabbed.
No, it's 37. It's 37 Corflu, so that's their name. That's his name. Corflu.
Oh my God. And I screamed bloody murder.
Oh, yes.
That was it.
So you bear was right off the book, right?
Right. We've gone before it started. Oh my.
It's his form of defensive braggadocio. He was very uneasy about his involved in subject areas, so he decided to overplay the hand. Well, I've seen that.
Yes. I would tend to think more than overplay. More than overplay. That's rather insensitive.
No, well, he grew up in Brooklyn. Humor was like a form of preliminary attack. You use jokes to put people back on their heels, and you get a laugh from all the many enemies of the person you're talking to. So what's that? No, it's Jewish humor has always had a large component of insult humor, and there are only two balances. One is against other people. The most prevalent one is against yourself. So self-deprecating humor, but it's more aggressive than self-deprecation. It's self-humiliation.
Yeah, that's self-deprecation.
I'm going to get the shot in before you have changed.
Okay.
I would assume it's
It's going to be in February or March.
what's the aggressive humor? You got to put people
Where?
off or get a laugh out of it.
Our target hotel is the Courtyard Marriott.
Hotel Marriott. Yeah. I mean,
Second round.
wow.
I know.
Are you going to the title then?
Yes. Why not?
I would like that. Sugar, yeah, sugar, alum, sugar. I think they have sugar baking bags.
Yes, they do. You want me to bring back some? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm good.
He's talking about
I go for
Last line on the last page. This is all Pablo's fault. John Purcell.
Since we paid for the mass quantity and everybody looks like they've been fed once, I can safely announce that there are leftovers. Those of you who wish a second plate are welcome to do so while supplies last. So hurry, hurry, hurry. I have.
She was flying high. I knew that's why he was so sweet about muffin.
Yeah, they're out there.
Why you think?
Yes, and suddenly she's become our waitress.
She has two hands.
Maybe somebody should.
Yes.
She'd be out of balance if only one.
Daily, yeah.
She actually, as everybody came by, and I can't complain. I didn't actually answer surgery. She had explained to me my
Yeah, I don't know what they are. I was the only one.
Sure.
Well, especially when there was, but she's all over.
I cannot tell what they are. What is that nuts and what doesn't?
What is much?
What has nuts and what doesn't?
You choose. You're entitled.
No. Your has. We'll give them whatever one you don't want to give them.
Yeah.
So,
I think I have four.
it's okay, we will look the other way. And
Do you need a fork?
No, please, 3 sheets.
just the program.
Yeah.
That's next year's.
Next year's bid information.
Oh, this is a very bad
College
idea.
Station, Texas.
It's very hard to get there.
They're all feeder flights from Houston. There's an airport there, and there are feeder flights from Houston and Dallas.
There are. But first you have to want to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's putting it on? I don't know anybody.
They figured out how to do
Oh,
it.
it's John Purcell.
San Pablo Vasquez.
I thought he was smarter than that. February in Texas. Wonderful. It's when the Bobcats are in bloom.
February, that's not bad. Better than May or June.
It's a smart thing for him to bid. He doesn't have to go to College Station.
Yeah. You notice that he's already stuck there. So might not really notice people that themselves. Actually, I gave a lecture series at College Station about 6 years ago. Okay.
I think this one's not that talented.
No, they are good place. They're Galveston. Well, Austin, yeah.
Oh, what? Not in Austin?
This is College Station.
Oh.
Let's put it this way. They put Texas A&M there because there was nothing else there. There's still nothing else there. That's why I still call it College Station.
That's where they have the outrageous bonfire. They have the outrageous bonfires. Bonfires. I thought wasn't that where they built the bonfires?
Yeah, huge bonfires that kills people. Yeah, that's certainly good aspect.
Alan Brown thinks that growing up Roseberry when they became the science advisor Alan's wife died in the middle of the year.
None of them
Who was just around Thanksgiving time. He was working in the White House
they're
here.
experienced with little magazine.
The phone rang and it was the president.
Well, they,
Go home.
and so he was in there helping.
Anyway, after a decent amount of time, Alan married
Stuff they
his
had done
assistant,
with the 69 World.
science advisor.
And explain terminology, things like that.
I'm never going to live there in College Station.
That sort of stuff. And
The dog runs for a couple of days before they meet anybody interested.
very serious mailing list that
Earliest stage.
and
Well, it doesn't matter. You go to a place, all you ever see is the inside of a hotel.
Yes.
because of that,
And the airport.
all the trainings jammed in
So,
and I was allowed to go around in there like Scrooge McDuck in the money pit. And that was how I learned. And so,
yeah, here's my badge.
I don't know what I did with it. But I realized I was every time I was American chest.
Yes.
Been a while since that happened, isn't it?
Yes. That too.
I think local generally
Yeah, I think so. considering all the people here are
Yes. Nearly 100 people have traveled nationwide and even internationally to come here to sit in the same small student and make extremely bad puns. I wonder what the draw is really. So
it's those things called fancy. I saw science fiction 5 years ago, and I thought about it.
Taking what?
Science fiction 5 years ago.
The magazine? You mean the fancy?
Well, for one thing, it was overly complicated. So I thought, well, they said $5. Take it. I thought, my problem is not carrying cash. So I didn't. But,
yes, that's the problem. So I can get by on this model.
yeah.
I always like that. It's so anonymous. You can't be traced. When I sold my place in Maui, the agent called me up after we got our price. Decades ago, $250,000. Called me up and said, the buyer says we can either go through the thing of, the check through the agency, or if you like, you can have somebody meet you at Orange County Airport, and they will fly in with $250,000 in a suitcase and hand it to you. And I said, really? It sounds like a drug deal. She said, yeah, me too. So I said, no, I don't want to do it that way. So we sell the property. We find out the buyer was the number 2 guy in the California state legislature who happened to have $250,000 of $20 bills in the suitcase. I'm not making this up. His name was Vasconcelos, and he introduced the self-esteem program into California schools to encourage people to believe that they're people that they actually aren't. And so it was very interesting that he went ahead to buy several other places there, all for cash. Because they happen to have a lot of cash around, always in $20 bills. So I did the calculation. You actually can put $250,000 in, like even the police, in $20 bills. And that was the way it was operated.
$250,000. It's a lot of cash. It's a lot of
I never introduced myself. My name is Gloria.
She was my editor long ago at Business Today.
She was
a buyer.
Oh, you really? Good. In Bethesda?
I don't live in Bethesda anymore. I'm now
Okay. So it's still not far.
No.
Oh, my name is yeah. Yeah. And my school, I was
which one?
But that was but after that, nothing.
My son had
Did he? Good. Yeah. But anyway, and I have a lot of friends. That's not quite as prolific as Ray.
Not quite as what? Prolific. Like your meeting can't shut up.
Well, we're talking about the written word now, correct?
Well, we still can't shut up. Particularly given Dragon software.
By the way, this thing's already live streaming.
people are watching you eat from all over the world.
I hope they're having fun.
Okay.
It's a live stream. It will.
So the people who don't have lives can watch ours.
Why do they watch it like that? I think they would turn it on and say, okay.
Believe me.
Yeah, thank you.
You screen images.
And if you have some more coffee, that too is on the way. Juan Valdez has gone out handpicked and coffee. If you want more coffee, it is out there, and I figured that was a message worth sharing. For the rest of it, go back to talk amongst yourselves, right?
No. It comes over for I go there.
So she doesn't actually sleep in the White House? Yeah. How many houses have had TV shows?
Well, given HGTV, quite a few now. Far too many, in fact.
Yeah, obviously, West Wing. The funny thing is that West Wing, the guy playing who knows everything, the president only has a high school education. He just knows how to fake really meaningless erudition. It's kind of funny that he does all this to show he's actually the least educated guy in the world.
Perhaps it's not the object of
Yeah, I know a lot of people like that in high school.
well, the millennials are not all.
I hear a lot of this from the colleagues at MC saying they come in and they haven't read anything, they don't know anything, but they have firm opinions about everything. I mean, you can talk about how in English they have firm likes and dislikes that are entirely abstract because they can't cite any examples. So they don't have any. And it's hard to get a philosophical depth out of superheroes.
Oh,
but it's just, you can't count on them having read any specific American text anymore. First, they didn't read much in high school, but it used to be you could always count on Kill a Mockingbird and Huck Finn. Now the number one taught novel in American high schools is The Lover, which is a B- novel. I had to teach it to actually, it's about a woman who, a black slave woman with her children who escaped from organization, moved somewhere in 1938, and all allowed for an owner to come out and try to find her and take her back. So out of fear of that happening, when there's a report it's in the same county looking for her, she kills some of her children, and then it's haunted by their ghosts. And in the faculty conference we had about how do we teach this book, I said, it's very strange. You've got to understand that you're trying to teach a book about a woman who kills her children because she has no imagination. And I said, how can you put the woman? I said, you can't read the text knowing that in 7 years your children will grow up. You can't. You're reading about somebody who makes an in the past, and it's supposed to be uplifting, but in fact it's just depressing. Because the lesson of the book is not so hasty in the career you can get better, but none of them have exceeded that. They made an argument that you have to forget what you know in order to understand the world. And I said, you're in the business of teaching people to forget what they know. They walk right into it. I mean, she could win the Nobel Prize in Literature. I can name 5 or 6 obscure Latvian poets who wrote them.
Yeah, but I know Toni Morrison. I don't know that. I know that her husband have studied when I see that's one of the so many I really like it.
I thought that maybe we'll give you about a 5-minute warning for those of you who take a pit stop. Do what you need and do that. And so somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, we will begin the official and highly dramatic closing ceremony. Will there be blood? Will there be blood? Oh, I love that. That is the slogan on the cover of my next book. Will there be blood?
Catch up to cover it.
I'm sorry? My ear momentarily famous. Anyway, I'm off to get water. You want anything?
You're taking off?
No, I'm just getting water. Coming back, tiptoeing out of view.
Oh, you go back. I just find it something for time I was hoping to have. I pulled out it.
Well, you gotta learn to go cut out the photos. Here's a quick if I do this now, is it important enough for you to be you're allowed to have some part.
Yeah. I'm sure I can. I will not go on
One of the Nobel Prize.
Yes.
Not too bad.
She is collecting.
Winner of the most outrageous cover award.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean,
No, well, I just couldn't get into my head. This YouTube feed. It's like different more power to messages. Yes. Really fancy, which was oh yes, yes. Wilmington Graham and Pat and John Purcell. Valerie saying hello.
What do you go to?
One of the best places I go to is something called In the Bar. It's a private group of little fans.
I thought about joining it, but Ken told me that there are a minimum of something like a dozen folks an hour. I mean, is it consequential or is it just people sniping at minutiae about band history like
Oh, right. Well, I think the tea bags of the concert were probably bought by
why have you have to go on trial?
Oh, yeah, you would be on trial for yes.
I've never
So much a good people here. I think you're
right. And the quest for 29 had become your legendary write up for the first down there.
One of these days you get a phone call. Great, guess what I found?
Yes. Yeah.
We'll be working on that.
Apparently they ran out of at least 100.
Well, if they are still in Ken's basement.
Ken's basement, the thought of it strikes horror. So it reeks of fetid gravity and medical practice.
Yes, I'm sure it does. I mean, I would think that if they're still there, they would.
February, it's a high of 18.
And I forget East
March,
Coast.
it's a high of
Oh, great. Guess it's dark right.
I mean, that's what woman is.
Well, yes.
Yeah, there's.
The little apple, every shop
No, he's ready to try to get me something. Of course, everyone in this world will say that as well. Yeah. Right. And Michael was started. That was because so far it's not moving. But it's fine. I
had sent me one of the 100-page
wow.
And we still have
it's sparkly. Conversation's not bad. It's just, it's right now. Or more, it's not open. Well, yeah. And it's not the same. It's not the same old
Yeah.
That's not gonna happen. How often is it? Well, we have to.
There's no one recent meetings. It's been days since I heard about what he does.
I know I can't.
Is everybody sufficiently fed, sufficiently watered, and sufficiently relieved to get on with the normal program?
I'm ready to see it start.
You're saying on something there.
That's all right. 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
Say they need a Corflu valve or something that would be something a little more appropriate, but I can't think of anything that would do.
Yeah. You say we're talking bing, 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 bing.
Boo-boo Zero. What they do at the South African
Vuvuzela. Yes. Well, that would be a rather long and unwieldy thing to hand over from one person to another. Maracas.
Yeah, and indeed more is going to come.
This corner.
All I'm doing is
I'll be pointing
figuring
it
out
out.
to do.
You want to do it just this way?
Yeah. All right.
It's really growing. Like you said, retreat to
Mostly at the podium.
It's been a while. Yes.
Walked out. I wanted to stand up for a while.
Is anybody among the British contingent particularly designated to receive awards for gift awards for those who are not here?
I can take these guys. I've got a spare case, which at the moment is empty enough, and I'll be packing around my small things.
Okay.
So if you wanted me to take anything,
Oh, it's not, it won't be a big call. You might want to move the paper over because you're just standing up here.
that's okay. I can move around. Yeah. I'm used to getting around.
Okay. All right. Is anybody hearing me now?
I may very well be. You've got Mayor Pat Charlotte and Don Purcell watching.
Hello, Pat. John Purcell. Emmett Purcell. All right, thank you.
We hired a subcontractor to repair our front shed. So many of them. The first part of my life was the next part of my life is the Maryland League of the Beaver. So this would be a couple of things.
That's excellent. I've got to take my better remember tonight. Yeah, good idea. I've gotten to the point where if I sit here daily, I have to put like 2 in one, 2 in another. Not that I take any
I will do that, yeah. Well, good morning and welcome to the final official part of the programming of Corflu 36. A couple of quick announcements. Number one, for people who are going to be departing in any of our lovely airports, people are going to be looking for shared rides, and so Jay is going to national, local people say national, Republicans say Reagan. That's right, and so that's right. You wanted blood, you got blood.
I was trying not to show up on the internet.
Well, there you go with that. So if you are, share the word around. I know Jay is looking for a shared ride or some way to get back to national. And for anybody else, always makes the trip home a little bit more pleasant. Or when you get on the airplane, you'll have even more reason to be grateful that you've escaped Washington. But let's see. After the formal presentation, we're going to try to go up. You know where Friday registration is? That little lit lobby, seating area off the lobby. I'd like to get a group picture. Okay. And which would be probably the back cover of next round of jottings, which I'm planning as the Corflu papers. And I've asked some of you already. I really want to follow up on this. I've decided, since the anthology was so great because you all did all the work and all I had to do was like drop the pages in. So that whole thing cost me about a day and a half's worth of work, and I like that in a fanzine. I'm going to try to do it again by asking you to, many of you have already been taking pictures, and Leonard has been doing wonderful. He keeps telling me, wait till you see them before you say thank you. But considering it'll be fine. And so we want to do that, but we'd like you to consider writing a con report about one piece of Corflu, one panel, one activity, and it's okay if more than one person addresses it. We're going to string them all together with a bunch of pictures. And then, of course, I will try to crop out and find individual shots of all of you and put them together in yearbook format, and I'm going to be labeling it senior class. Pardon me? Are we going to do the things? The cover and that cover will be in color because that comes free with a Creative Space Kindle Direct Publishing project. The interior could be in color quite easily as long as everybody wants to pony up $15 to $18 a copy. And if you do, I'll be happy to oblige. Otherwise, black and white. And I don't know if I told you what Random Johnny's cost per issue. $3.44 a copy, counting shipping and handling, which is remarkable. And actually, thanks to Dan, you know what, those really high-class frames on the print? High class, yeah. Don't blame me for that. No, I mean, I figured any kind of frame is good. 86 cents. We spare no expense at Corflu to make sure that you get we spell no small expense, right? So we because I'm starting to think like a millennial. Everybody is a winner, so everybody must get prizes. So there was a Justin Minack award winner. I actually have something for the new Qua person this year. And we're going to be giving out shortly 8 fairly nice looking trophies, I do say so, and 20 award certificates. So most of you should, hopefully we'll be able to share the love a little bit. And so that will be shortly. We have Jim Benford, who is now the highest paid guest of honor in the history of Corflu. $280. It came just in time so he can pay his bills this month. So I want you to know that we live to help bail out our less fortunate members. And so he will be doing a speech. I kept telling, people have been threatening Steve Jeffrey, our Corflu 50 winner, that he should do something. But what I'll get you to do is stand up. And so Steve Jeffrey, our Corflu 50 winner. I do remember, I did talk to one person in this. Oh, that's good.
I'd just like to thank a few people here. Thank you. It's been brilliant. It's been a blast. I've enjoyed it. You've made me feel welcome. Thank you very much.
That may be one of the best guest of honor type presentations I've ever heard. You can have a big hurdle to beat with something like that. I do remember one, the other convention that I sort of ran, actually ran but sort of a convention, was a one-day Carolina Comic Con that I co-ran with Ed Smith in would have been 71. And our media presentation, we found a local guy who collected films, so we watched The Time Machine with Portuguese subtitles. Our guest of honor, as such, was a man named Lloyd Kropp, who wrote actually a rather wonderful Sargasso Sea fantasy called The Drift. He was a writing professor at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I got him down, and he made probably the finest guest of honor speech I've ever heard. He stood up and said, "Furthermore," and sat down. So we will do our awards presentation. We will do our guest of honor speech. We have welcomed our Corflu 50 delegates. We should also once again recognize that we are honored and privileged to have the TAF winner for the Dublin World Con, Jerry Sullivan. And even better, we must compliment both Jerry and Spike for keeping us well lubricated. Beer one night, wine the next. And
guest of honor at Dublin World Cup.
is
Bill and Mary.
I didn't know that. Oh, congratulations! Double congratulations, our fan guest of honor. The Dublin World Cup. Anybody else who's Spanishly important? Real word does not count. But anybody else Spanishly important who hasn't been recognized? Right? Nigel stands up.
He said important, Nigel.
That's right.
Not in
Let's see. We have the awards. We have the past president of Fan Writers of America. Are there any other things that will be
Next year's Corflu.
Pardon me?
Next year's Corflu.
Next year's.
We
were just done, aren't we? Just done.
Comes at the very end.
At the very end, there will be a bid. It's going to be a close race between the Corflu Mar-a-Lago bid, which I'm running, and Corflu Heatwave, located in College Park, College Station, Texas.
College Park, Maryland.
College Park, yes, College Station, Texas. And so that will come at the end. And if anybody remembers anything I forgot, well, this is fandom. You will not suffer in silence. Again, afterwards, go on. I can get that. Mr. Lynch.
Yeah, just one thing. You implied that there were rides to all 3 airports and you only named 1?
No, I didn't imply that there were rides at all.
Oh.
I just said if you are going to one of the airports and you are looking for a shared ride, you should spread the word among your fellow fans in hopes of doing that. Alas, we did think I was going to borrow my friend's Rolls and chauffeur everybody, but that just didn't work out this year. So I want to apologize for that. Probably get the Jag, but no, the back. Yes, right. I want the stretch limo. Yes. Yeah. Roll. I ended up being very underwhelmed. It drives like a truck. It's heavy. I mean, but that is neither here nor there, and it's very little to do with Corflu. So let us say our first item. What is our next? You actually remembered an agenda, which I didn't.
More or less.
Right, and that would be this, Mr. Phillips.
That would be to welcome you all to the 2019 Fan Awards.
Oh, whoops! Thank you. So this reminded me that I had forgotten to. In the same way that the Oscars always begin with something like Best Supporting Actress, we wanted to make sure. I have 2 extra awards to throw in. If I've done anything really well at Corflu, if I have any marks of true genius, the first was getting Kurt Phillips to be our hospitality steward. It was a job that truly terrified me more than anything else, because that would have been a real, and once he did it, I felt much better about the whole experience. And the other person that I was, again, by true genius, came out by listening to Andy Hooper, who explained to me the right way to go about the Corflu auction. And, and after all, who can't like somebody who gives you lots of money? And thank you. And in fact, a full third of the total Corflu budget is Andy. And that's really great. And that's why I couldn't decide.
Let me just interrupt you to point out, all of that money is raised by selling old fanzines, not selling myself or any other kind of hard work. It's all fanzines that pay for Corflu.
If Andy had sold himself, we would have at least doubled the money, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, but that's right. But that's why I wanted to start, before we get on with the real stuff, by awarding the Corflu 36 MVP certificate. One to Kurt Phillips. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the other to Andrew Hooper.
To the internet.
As usual.
Hello, internet.
And as usual, if anything went wrong and you didn't like it at Corflu, it was either Andy's fault for being too cheap or Kurt's job problem for being too incompetent running a hospitality suite. If it worked, it's mine. So thank you. Now I can shut up about the rest.
Well, let me just say thank you for this, Mike, and if you enjoy the con suite, you all ought to be thanking my wife, Elizabeth. Who said And now, without any further ado, I'd like to call upon my colleague here, the very well-known, very well-respected science writer, science fiction writer, professional physicist, Dr. Gregory Benford, who will help present the awards today. Greg.
Well, it's certainly been a remarkable course.
There's no microphone there.
I know. It's, it's a friend. Okay, so I must say, Michael coined one of the most interesting examples of strangely pornographic warnings I'd ever heard when he earlier today said, for those of you who got screwed in the egg department, you're not going to make it in PC University with terms like that. Now, it's interesting. I like notes like this where the first item says, "These we will do last." To the man behind the curtain, right? Okay, we're going to give out certificates for distinguished performance beyond the call of duty. Say that's the West Point speech. For example, best ginzine, voted in by democratic methods and achieving the results that the winner is Banana Wing.
Yeah.
Claire Braley, Mark Plummer. And who accepts it for them? And here we go.
That's right.
Valiantly hobbling to the podium. Here we are.
Well, thank you on Terranauts behalf.
Yes, indeed. Now, moving quickly along, Fan Activity Achievement Awards, Best Personal Fanzine. And boy, this certainly is well deserved. Andy Hooper, flag. Right.
Whoever voted for me, thank you very much. I promise the next one is coming out in just a few weeks.
Right. And yeah.
Oh, and then I tied, even better.
Oh, that's right. It's a tie.
It is.
Number 2 is Graham Charnock with Vibrator.
Oh.
The first fanzine named for an appliance.
Would you rather I just collect
And so this too?
Dr. Rob will be collecting all these fanzines for going back over the pond. I'm sure I can speak for Graham Charnock very well when I say thank you. I'm very humble. I'm being Graham here. I'm very proud to receive this award for Vibrator, and rightly so, because I am publishing, as Graham, the best fanzine in the world.
Stop.
Well, that might encourage him to come back.
Yes, well, many of our awardees are semi-dead. Best Newszine, of course it's won by David Langford for Ansible.
And I don't think Dave Langford has ever won a fan award before.
Wow.
That's one
We were talking about a guy who has a separate room in his house for his awards alone. It's of course also the guest room.
And it's well deserved and well overdue.
And the lights never go out. So you could see the awards at all times. Best Apozine goes to Fred Lerner for the famously unpronounceable
Lofternost.
Yeah, see what I mean? Yes. It's anyway.
It's Middle English. I have no idea what
I'm sure Fred remembers.
I know, I read it all the time, but I never have tried to pronounce it in public.
Yeah, wait a minute, I do remember now. It's something to do, it's like it's a sense of an ineluctable longing or something like that.
Sure, just
The
never
final
trust
word
a
in
twin.
Beowulf.
Yeah, don't trust the twin.
It could be, so who's gonna collect?
Corflu will accept that on Fred's behalf and we'll make sure he gets it to him.
Okay, now, we come to the hot spot. Best special publication is Lake's Folly, Christina Lake.
Lake's Folly.
Right.
Starting at 2 o'clock on the Corflu 36 Facebook group, I've already pre-scheduled information and 1 minute apart, starting at 2 Eastern. All of the awards will be appearing, so if you don't want to write them down right at the moment, you will be able to get them online.
Oh. This. Right. Okay, now we get an actual physical object, and it is for the best fan writer, won by Mark Plummer. Is this object called the Enchanted Duplicator, which means that the winners of this award henceforth will be called dupes. And Mark is also not here. So this, you'll be getting an extra appropriation for your added baggage.
Keep my second case running.
Okay. Number 2, by the way, number 2 for this award was Andy Hooper. And number 3 was Paul Skelton. There's special certificates.
Yeah, that's fine, right?
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Now, there's a certificate especially for special recognition for services to the hobby and the heartland. Andy Hooper, yet again.
Nice.
He's already been awarded with all these awards. Right. I like it being an award which can also serve duty as kindling. And there's a special historical award here for smooth operator.
Well, we did that. Let me put it in. We wanted a category, or I wanted a category for somebody who's present, cheers up every convention, somebody that we are always happy to see, somebody who just adds a lot of in-person spirit to fandom, because fan activity is not merely through print or various media, but also includes what we all do together. And so the smooth operator, in obvious honor of Tucker, is for the person that you all have decided is the best company and the people we want to see.
Yes, and luckily I can pronounce the winner's name. And even though the Good Fellowship Award does not go to a fellow, it goes to Spike.
Nice.
It's about time the librarians started to win more awards.
Not so loud, not so loud.
I like laconic. Taken to the extreme. And now, a special award for unrecognized vanished achievement. Earl Wing. Handwriting, art, and publishing over many years. Excellent. And accepting for him will be
Corflu. If nobody steps up, it's Corflu.
Murray can take it.
Murray?
Oh, yeah. Okay, Murray.
Yes.
There we are.
I think we're getting a little off sequence here, but what the heck? We'll handle it. We're fandom. We can handle anything.
For best online archive or resource is
fiawall.org.
That's Joseph Moore,
Edie Stern.
That's Rob Hansen.
I'll get you a correct one shortly. I don't know why, because my fingers were just going, and I know the name of your organization, but I ended up typing. I don't know why Fiawall stuck in my mind.
Thank you, and keep giving us stuff to archive.
Vanek.org.
There you go.
Okay, it was really fantastic. Now, that's online news and information resource. Inevitably, Ansible. Dave,
I can remember when it used to be Locust. Remember that?
And accepted by Corflu for Dave's behalf.
Right. Best online group or list, Harry Bell et al. For In the Bar.
Yeah.
Ted should accept for that.
Yes, Ted should accept that.
Yes.
Sure,
Well,
why not? Because you've been in the bar longer than anyone.
Well, Harry's kind of dropped out.
Well, then keep it.
I don't know who I should be forwarding this to. Thank you on their behalf.
Dr. Rob can probably carry it over very easily.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Right. Right.
Mike, if it's okay with you, I think we'll just go ahead and do all the certificates in a group here.
At the end of the day, people who receive awards will probably not be complaining about the order in which they were.
That's true.
There we go.
And there are still a few people in the room who have not received.
We're working on it.
Best fanzine cover, Brian Parker for Beam number 13.
Excellent.
That's right. Yes, another fanzine named after Beam, or rather Boost. Best fanzine cover, digital or photography, Jerry Sullivan. Yes, and it's you who are going to be responsible for so much future kidney and liver damage. Yes. Next, best illustrator, Vanish, also seemingly inevitable, Steve Stiles.
Yeah.
Now you go, but it's more sincere.
And moreover, okay, thank you.
So if you haven't won an award yet, would you raise your hand? And best photographer, yet again, Dick Jensen, who is Ditmar.
Yes.
Also his first fan award, I believe.
The first fan award?
His first fan award.
Oh, his first.
Ditmar
Well,
Parsons.
but he's won many Australian awards.
Yes.
Yeah,
We don't count those
absolutely, but I don't think
because,
we've ever voted him a fan award.
Right, but those awards are upside down, so they don't count. Best graphic design, The White Notebooks by Pete Young. Oh. And yet, so another person named White wins an award. Great. Now, best Spanish article, John Henry Holmberg, Trapdoor number 34, WorldCon Kaleidoscope, about different worlds. No, he's huge.
Now, what's the full name of that particular award? Is it?
WorldCon Kaleidoscope.
No, that's the article. Best article, Spanish.
Yeah, Spanish.
Because we have another award for
Oh,
best
that's right.
article, Circon.
Zircon. So
Old meeting.
the best person who fans only when they are stoned, that's why it's called the Zircon Award, is Weisinger's WorldCon by Andy Hooper, trapdoor number 34.
Thanks to Bob Lichtman for publishing these very long articles.
The best thing about history is they just keep making more of it. Best series or column, Roadrunner, Mark Plummer, Banana Winks. So once again, adding to your baggage count, the way back. And now the Harry Warner Jr. Memorial Award for Best Letter Hack, Paul Skelton. And he's also not.
He's in Toronto. I'll take it.
Yeah.
We'll sort that out later.
He is hiding out in Toronto.
And now for the heavy awards.
Now for the heavy, actually called the deuce, but the number one fan face, Mark Plummer.
I'm gonna go ahead and WhatsApp to Claire and let her know what's going on here.
Yeah,
Are they not watching online?
I don't know.
No, don't think so.
Right. So it's not like the phone ringing in the early hours of the morning and it's somebody from Stockholm, right?
I can make the phone ring, but it's not the early hours.
Now, for best online fan activity, of course, fanact.org. Here's a sharp object to get through TSA.
Good thing we're driving.
Thank you. Thank
We'll
you.
give you the box to go.
Oh, here you go.
Oh, yeah.
Look at this.
Good.
I did.
And now another
Screwed up the paper certificate.
a special sharp pointed object for
Oh, let's give you, the two situations in here that are somewhat special is that what Bill Burns, the fanzines, had won every online category as long as it had been offered, if I recall correctly.
Right.
And, you know, that's right. And so we wanted to put out, it was pointed out to me that if the committee awarded special awards, who the hell cares? But the vote, so I put them up on the ballot, the special awards for people who are being retired from certain categories. And so the voters decided who was, whether they were going to be awarded or not. I don't want to keep you in suspense as what the answer is, but.
Yeah, I think you kind of gave it away. It's, of course, e-fanzine. Bill Bell. So no more of this.
Thank you, everybody, for 20 years support of eFanzine.
Yes.
There are several thousand fanzines on there, several hundred titles, and please keep sending them. Thank you all.
Quick interruption from Creighton. Claire says, "Oh, we're looking." Marcus said, "Gosh," several times.
It's as strong as it gets for him. It's crumbs.
It's very early, isn't it?
No, it's been quite
Best
late.
fan
actually,
artist,
Oh,
Alan White.
Everyone accepts this on Alan's behalf, and we'll sure get it out to Las Vegas for him very soon.
And gamble it away. And now, special award for artistic achievement,
Retiring him from the category.
Steve Stock.
Bingo.
You know you're getting old and you get tired of all the damn awards.
Anyway, thank you, and it's been a lot of fun.
Now, remember, Steve, this does not mean you get to retire from actually creating more artwork.
Okay.
No. Keep going.
Best fanzine. I never won one of these. Banana Wings. What's more, another sharp when you're not for England.
Our final award.
No.
Oh, but one.
Yeah, oh, good, all right.
I just did that to make Mike run.
Lifetime Achievement Award.
No, that's the one, that's Andy's presenting
Oh, I
this.
beg pardon.
That's the one. Are there any others that have not been?
I don't know. I'm just a talent
That's
here.
right.
I don't know.
That's right. That's right. Never joined the kind of occupation where talent is a swear word. Oh, that's the talent. Right. Yeah, right. But Andy ran the balloting process for selecting the Lifetime Achievement Award. So he will be awarding the Enchanted Duplicator in that category and also taking care of that.
So
here, yeah.
To use an actor's term, what's my motivation here?
Yeah, that's right. Your motivation is you get a break.
Let me take the brown position for a moment. Here, I want to go here. So the Lifetime Achievement Award was instituted in 2010 at Corflu, Winchester, essentially by Rob Jackson. And the first recipient of the award was Ted White. And at the time, Rob had a fairly eloquent rationale and kind of criteria by which he wanted to choose lifetime achievers, but of course no one can remember them. And from year to year, each subsequent committee has approached the Lifetime Achievement Award in a different way. It has gathered different people to offer their opinions. This year, elements of this committee opined that the award was in fact somewhat redundant, given the nature of the past presidency of FWA as something that essentially was sort of a Lifetime Achievement Award. I argued that when has redundancy ever stopped us from doing anything? So I wanted to give you a quick list of the people who have won the Lifetime Achievement Award in the past to remind you who we've already honored. Those individuals are Ted White, Art Widner, Eleanor Busby, Earl Kemp, Shelby Vick, Ray Nelson, Peter Weston, John Bankson, and last year we inducted or honored Bruce Gillespie. Now, all of these are people who have had a considerable amount of achievement in the fanzine field, and I think that everyone would feel fairly comfortable with the idea of giving them an award for the things that they've done in a generic sense. But this year, the people with whom I talked about the Lifetime Achievement Award felt that we wanted to advance two new criteria. One was there some form of fan activity, some basic, some really important element of our subculture that has not really been recognized by the award in the past. And the second principle was the person ought to be someone who has a connection to Corflu. We have, I don't mean any disrespect at all to Nigel for choosing John Bankson in Chicago. John, of course, does not have a very direct connection to Corflu, never having been to one. But for Nigel, who was the center of that Corflu and did all the work that basically made it happen, John Bankson was very important to him, and he felt like that was the person he most wanted to recognize with the award, and that was the connection to Corflu. So I think you could argue there are a lot of arguments that could be advanced for the person that we chose this year. But I felt that in looking over the list of people that we've honored in the past, that I saw people who were brilliant writers, brilliant editors, people who had written all sorts of humorous and serious material in fandom, artists, people who had organized conventions, and people who were just about the best company that you could ever have, like, say, Art Whitman. One thing that we thought had not been represented very effectively was the art of letter hacking. Letter writing is the dark matter of the science fiction fanzine universe. It's the invisible material which makes fanzines work continue, I think. Anyone can do one good fanzine, but without good letters coming in response, your motivation to do a second one is considerably limited. So I wanted to choose somebody who we basically thought of more than anything else as being a letter writer, and so you probably can guess, therefore, who we chose. This year's Lifetime Achievement Award is going to go to Paul Skelton. Paul has been active. Rob Jackson and I thought that he has been active since 1970s, very close to reaching his 50th year in fandom, or perhaps he's even beyond it, and will be corrected by the internet shortly. There's a long list of fanzines that are attributed to Skell, including Alice in Wonderland, Hell, Inferno, King Kong, and of course the fabulous SFD, Small Friendly Dog, or Stamp Out Flatulent Dinosaurs, or any alternative titles that were used for it. But I guess that in a way that material pales in comparison to the enormous tide of letters which Paul has written over the last 50 years. Paul's letters are not, they're not simple responses. They are pieces of performance art. They often are completely tangential to the material that you offered in your fanzine. But by going on a lengthy discursion on a topic which he hopes will be of interest to both of you, Paul is saying to you, I appreciated your effort and I will match it in this way. So I pretty much run out of steam, but let's have a nice applause. Let's have a hand. Oh, and I'm sorry, one more thing also. Paul has basically donated his fanzine collection for our use to raise money for the Corflu 50 and for Corflu's own coffers and various other charitable things. So Steve wouldn't be here, and a lot of other things wouldn't have happened without that very recent act of charity and big-heartedness. So thanks to him for that as well. Anyway,
A lot of those 50s fanzines in the auction were for him.
Yeah, they were from Paul. So everyone, Paul Skelton.
And on our theme that everybody should have a prize, I'll take a card out of Stan Lee's book, and if you didn't get one, you get a no prize.
I just thought they were all mine.
Thank you to Greg Benford for helping present the award.
For those who are afraid that there's another Benford on call, he'll be helping you soon.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah. Ted, you want to do Swan now, or you want to wait till after the
Two Benfords are waiting.
why don't we get that out of the way? So
Let's get it out of the way.
Ted White, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, as the vast majority of you know, we do this every year. In 1984, at the Los Angeles Worldcon, why is there a switch up here?
to distract you.
No, I think it's supposed to turn on lights that don't work.
You just launched the
In
missile.
1984 in Los Angeles at the Worldcon, the Fan Writers of America was founded in a very, very smoky party that had, God, close to 50 people in it. All fans. And we were so excited by this that we called up Lucy Hunsinger, who had already gone to bed, and made her come down to our party to join us for this. And at first, we tried to do this at an actual Worldcon, and that did not seem to be practical. The last time we did it was in '86 in Atlanta. And from that point on, it's been done exclusively at Corflu, which is where it belongs. Now, the Fan Writers of America as a gesture of American imperialism, includes everyone in the world who writes fan stuff. Everybody in this room is automatically included and a member. And each year at Corflu, we pick last year's president, the past president. This confers upon the recipient a degree of honor and absolutely no obligation to do anything, which is as it should be. With that said, nominations are now open.
Mr. Past Chairman?
Yes.
I would like to point out that I believe there is an individual in this room who was in that smoke-filled room in 1984 and has never been recognized with this lack of honor. And in that spirit, I would like to nominate Victor Manuel Gonzalez as past president.
Do I hear any other nominations?
Move to close nominations.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, Victor Gonzalez has been voted by acclamation.
Thank you very much. Actually, Victor, you will get something that no past president Foy has ever had. When I was buying cheap trophies to deal with Sandra and Justin Minnack, I found this and managed to do it. So here you have a little paperweight. It was, and I want you to know, we spared no expense. $13.95. Congratulations, past president Foy.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you all. It's been a wonderful convention, and this is really all I ever wanted in terms of I do remember that 1984 night, and it's been a brilliant thing. I put member Foy on every fanzine I've ever done since then.
Good for you.
It's the only club I ever really wanted to belong to.
That was your first convention, wasn't it?
First World Cup. Thank you very much.
And any other items of Corflu business before we enter the high stakes world of microwave physics? Anything else? Then I would like to introduce as you know, at Corflu, we go out of our way to go through a rigorous selection process to make sure we only have the finest guests of honor. This year, as I said, we awarded the princely sum, an honorarium never before achieved, of $280 to our guests of honor, along with the bragging rights, professional credentials, tenure track qualifications that come along with it. And the groupies, yeah. Can't forget the groupies. Can't forget the groupies. That's I think my friend Doug Niles once said, you know, why are we doing Dungeons and Dragons and alternate history as opposed to getting into some art that had groupies? But there we go.
Yeah,
all right. So with all of that, I will introduce the man who needs no introduction, Jim Benford, the editor of, or the co-editor of the Starship Century, anthology of papers presented at the DARPA conference on starship engineering. And as Jim will tell you himself, the author of the only piece in that entire book that actually has an even halfway practical solution that something might actually work. So with that, the man who will bring us to the stars, the man who will transform the world in which we live, Mr. Jim Benford. There you go. And this will give you the very first one.
Turn the lights down.
I will turn the lights down. And where are the lights? Turn down. Further back. Oh, hidden around the corner. And let's find out which ones.
Well, as my younger brother told you, in fact, Ted and I told you yesterday, 60 years ago, we came to the end of the first era of Void. Thank you for your invitation to tell you about the rest of my life. Because it's been actually, I was reading back through the voids, and I realized that Jim Benford of 60 years ago would have been quite amazed at what has happened. And you are probably going to be too. You know, my title here is Ad Astra via Fandom. And the subtitle is Our First Starships, because that's actually what I'm working on now. And I think that Jim Benford would have been amazed to see that possibility emerge. Well, I'm going to cover this in a personal and a technical way. There's only one equation, and if anybody can tell me what that equation is, I'll give them $10. And by the way, of that $280, I spent most of it at the auction yesterday. And so, if this works, 10 years after the end of Void, I got a PhD from the University of California, San Diego, PhD in physics, plasma physics. During that time, I met this woman, 1965, and married her. She's Hilary Foister from England. We had 2 children. This is a picture of 1974. See, I'm going to throw in a lot of personal stuff, too. Of me running on the beach in Fairhope, Alabama, where I'm from. I know you can't detect the accent, but I could deliver this in a southern accent if you would like. But it would take longer. That's my son Dominic, who's now almost 50 years old, and is the chief scientist of the Wide Field Infrared Space Telescope at NASA headquarters. We did a lot of traveling. I recommend everybody go see the Taj Mahal. It's a hell of a lot bigger than you think it is. You can't even see the people in the distance in this photo. I've been around the world a lot, hundreds of international trips, done a lot of work in physics, but my best time, the most time I spent in the last 40 years was in gardening. This is my West Garden. This is a small part of the West Garden in Lafayette, California. So I just want to give you a feeling for what's happened in my life, and you'll see other photos like this going forward. This talk will take about 30 minutes or so. So those of you in the back, we can turn out the lights, and you can go back to sleep. What I did when I left the university was go into the private sector. It goes to my brother, who has always been a slave to the state government of California. It's called the university. I went into the private sector and I worked on a new technology that was just emerging. And when I read the literature for it in accepting a job at Physics International, I realized there were only 6 papers on the entire subject. Now that is an opportunity. This is a Marx generator. Look at the scale of it. It's an electrical machine that produces 5 million volts and 100,000 amps for a period of about a microsecond. This is a man, tall guy, actually, I know him. And this is what you do. You fill this chamber with oil, you charge this, you fire this Marx, you charge that line, and you compress the electrical pulse down to about the length of this room at the speed of light, 50 nanoseconds. A nanosecond is a foot. And you produce intense particle beams, an entirely new field. This is what a Marx generator looks like when it fires. You can see the switches firing and all these very complex things going on. It's a really big piece of energy. You propagate the beams, and so I got to study the propagation of beams, but it had never been seen before. Here's the kind of thing you can do with a beam that's as long as this room at the speed of light when it hits an object. This is blow-off propagated over a distance of a few meters from an intense electron beam in 1970. You blow a hole right through it. And it's a very interesting set of physics that had to do with defense work at the time, and it's come back because of the existence now of hypersonic missiles. Well, pulse power has many manifestations, and here's one of them, a system that I eventually ended up running the entire pulse power area at Physics International. And this is something we delivered to the British for merely $8 million. And that it runs a simulator for a high-power microwave system that's located in the west of England. What else can you do with these particle beams? Well, I was always very interested in thermonuclear fusion, for power. So I figured out how to inject beams into toroidal geometry, such as the tokamak that we now know to be the principal approach to thermonuclear fusion control, which I think will probably fail. But in any case, I succeeded in injecting beams into a toroidal geometry and shown in this photograph. Here's the injector, and the beam circulates around here. This, of course, is a magnetic solenoid magnetic field. And this was actually quite a success because it's used now in tokamaks to inject beams, neutral beams or charge beams. It works for both, and it means you can couple the energy beam directly into a plasma by injection, which hadn't been able to be done before. I was also interested in the use of intense particle beams to generate enormous pulses of microwaves, which I will show the application of in a moment. Here is the best thing I did in that field in a period of about 10 years. The 7 relativistic magnetrons. You may wonder, what is a magnetron? It's the thing in your microwave oven. But this generated 2 billion watts of power. 2,000 million watts, okay? Or you could say it any way you want. It's an enormous pulse of energy in a very short time, and that was back in 1991. All of this is a vacuum chamber, and this is the master oscillator that drives all of these secondary oscillators, which come out in waveguides to the side to antennas, and antennas radiate toward a target, and you can put an enormous pulse of microwave energy at great distances. And that can be used, a thing like this will destroy electronics at the range of 10 miles. These exist, things like this exist in the arsenals of the world, primarily the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese, but you never hear about it. And you never hear about how they're being used. And you didn't hear about it from me. At that time, I looked like this. That was the middle 70s. But then I left Physics International in '96 because I wanted to do bigger, greater things, and I learned everything I could in this really wonderful company I worked at for 26 years. And I founded a company called Microwave Sciences because I wanted to specialize in the use of high-power microwaves in every way I could. That is the time of my first retirement. I took retirement from the corporation, and that was the first of my several failed retirements. And let's see, my second retirement was 12 years later. The company had done very well, which I hadn't really planned on. But as John Lennon said, life is what happens while you're making other plans. And that's what's happened to me. Now I'm going to move on to a larger subject, and that is starships. Because one of the things that I've increasingly been interested in and working on is the possibility of building starships. This is a current version of a fusion rocket. This is called Firefly, 750 meters long. I mean, think about that. That's bigger than an oil tank. That's bigger than a container ship. Here's the fusion reaction here. Here's the exhaust. There's a debris shield out front to protect from all the stuff you're going to encounter. This goes at about 8% of the speed of light. And it would cost $500 billion to build it if we knew how to do fusion. But it's a reasonable concept. But as I show, the point I'm making is that here's Firefly, a Z-pitch fusion rocket. You're not going to see this happen because they're too big, too complicated, larger than the largest ocean vehicles we have, and far too expensive. What's more, it's a throwaway. It doesn't come back. It is a one-way trip, and it decelerates, and then you're in another star system, and then you have to build another one. I don't think that's a good approach. And another thing is, think of the mass. I mean, this is 100 tons or something. Think about it this way. This is a hydrogen bomb explosion. The specific kinetic energy per kilogram equivalent to say a kilogram of mass is equivalent to the energy in a hydrogen bomb per kilogram of hydrogen bomb. If you're going at only less than 4% of the speed of light. You go at 4% of the speed of light, you have more energy in the kinetic energy of that kilogram than a hydrogen bomb does when it goes off. In other words, you don't want heavy masses in starships, because if you come in with, say, 100 or 1,000 ton starship with that much energy at 10th the speed of light, it's going to look like an invasion, isn't it? Or an attack. It's going to look like the worst thing you ever imagined. It's kind of like what the dinosaurs didn't see, right? So what are our alternatives for starships? Here they are. First of all, look at this horizontal scale here. This is the velocity that Apollo achieved in coming back from the moon, about 25,000 miles an hour. This is done in kilometers per second. Here's the speed of light, the 10th, 100th, 1,000th, 10,000, 100,000. The yellow dots here are real things that we have built and have used. Fastest velocity ever achieved is by Helios 2, although it's just been exceeded by the probe that's orbiting the sun now, and it's going to the Van Allen probe, Parker probe, that's gotten up to a somewhat higher velocity. The highest velocity achieved so far by a human object is 100 kilometers a second, which is right there. Okay, so that's what you can do with chemical rockets. This is the chemical rocket line. Okay, now other things like ion rockets and such can get up there, but they all suffer from the rocket equation. The rocket equation is easily described in a simple way. Whatever the exhaust velocity going out the back, the vehicle can get at most 2 or 3 times as much of that speed. Beyond that, it becomes extremely inefficient, and your payload fraction just goes to almost to 0. So that means that chemical energy will never get to the velocities you need for starships, because the basic idea of starships is you got to get to this 10th of the speed of light for openers, because then it'll take you 40 years to get to the nearest star, which is longer than the lifetime, a technical lifetime, although my technical lifetime is now 60 years, but you just got to go fast. Okay, so what else can you do? Well, there's fusion, which we do not know how to do. Up here, there's fission, which we know how to do, but threw away at the back in the 70s. And an interesting piece of recent news is that the next fiscal year budget has $100 million going back into the fusion, into fission rocketry to build fission rockets. They make a lot of sense, not because they'll go so much faster, a few hundred kilometers a second, but because they have so much more thrust that they can put serious payloads. You'll notice that the payloads for the probes we've sent around the solar system to New Horizons and such, they weigh about as much as the people sitting around one of these tables. They're really, really light because of the rocket equation. The payload fraction is very small. And although this thundering rocket takes off, very little of it gets way out to the edge of the solar system because it has to, because the rocket equation, and we're in the potential well and have to eat our way out, and that costs fuel and energy. So we're never going to build anything that's really serious for, say, colonization of Mars if we don't get higher thrust. And the fission rocket is the obvious one thing we actually know how to do, but stopped doing around 1972. But then there's fusion. Back to fusion again. Well, only problem with fusion, we still don't know how to do it. I'm an optimist about the fact that I think some of the exploratory matters underway will, within the next 5 to 10 years, achieve break even in fusion. And we'll start to be much more optimistic about it. I think it's going to help us provide a lot of energy in society by the midpoint of this century. That's my personal opinion. And then there's antimatter. Well, we don't know how to do that either because we can make only a microgram a year or something. And with current technologies, we can never make enough for fuel. But what's more, antimatter rockets are actually really hard to make work because it's very hard to trap the energy. I'll say no more about that, but it's very hard to really get a lot of that energy into propulsion of the rocket because a lot of it's in neutral particles that don't interact with magnetic fields. That's the basic reason. But there is another approach, and that's what I'm going to spend all the rest of my time talking about. sails. Solar sails, you all know what that is. You put something out in the sun and the sun pushes it. Now, when you go outside, even on the sunniest of days, the sun doesn't knock you down. So the thrust is very, very, very low. Why? Because the photons that bounce off you exchange very little energy. All you've done is reverse its momentum, and the efficiency is negligible. You need a lot of photons. In fact, you need to get a sufficient acceleration, you need gigawatts of power to get up to high velocities. Now, solar sails can be used to sail around the solar system very slowly. It take you a year to get from low Earth orbit to geosynchronous, for example. From there to Mars, several years. So it's actually very slow. But those aren't, the sun is not the only source of photons, because you can use particle beams. Now, they could be neutral particle beams, they could be photon beams. Neutral particle beams are an interesting alternative that has been little understood, and I've been working on it the last couple of years. Charged particle beams is impossible because the charged particle beam will just explode in space because of mutual repulsion of the particles. So, photons, on the other hand, means microwave beams, millimeter wave beams, or laser beams. Laser beams are always the most popular because laser sounds kind of sexy, doesn't it, everybody? It's a big deal. They're very expensive, however. The beam-driven sail has been looked at a lot by Greg Matloff, Jeff Landis, who's also a science fiction writer, Bob Forward, I'll talk about him, my old friend Bob, by Bob Frisbee, Andy, and Malroy, at very high speeds, because in principle, you can get up into this region, but you have very powerful beams and very light sails. So it's the only way we know that under the laws of physics that we know and the engineering that we know, you can actually do. And that incited me as starting microwave sciences to try to see if I could make that happen. Here's what happened. This is just a detail at the high end. Yeah, this is Bob Forward's concept, graphically illustrated. The idea is you build a big beam generator, not looking like this. You use a focusing optic like this, and you accelerate a sail with microwaves at enormous accelerations. And a sail that's a really smart, advanced circuit that's able to do what it has to do, and I'll describe what that is. And you just push it very fast out of the solar system toward the stars. You realize right away this is a flyby mission, because there isn't another beamer at the other end to slow it down. Not yet. In fact, once you get there and you build a colony, you can build a beamer, you can slow it down. There are other ways to slow it down, but it's hard to do. But recall that in our exploration of the solar system, we've now passed by or landed on all of the 9 planets that there were 9 when I was a kid. There are going to be 9 again, actually. I think Pluto's coming back. I think, pretty sure Alan Stern is really pushing for it. And all of the first missions to those planets were done by flyby. And so flyby is the way you do the first time you do stuff. In fact, we've landed only on 3 objects, on Venus, on Mars, and on Titan. That's the only landers we've had so far. So this is a flyby mission, and here's what's happened with that idea. I love to put in graphics that show you a beam hitting a sail and the way it goes. The big problem at the far end is, how do you get the information back? Well, if you've got a sail that looks like this, you use the sail itself as a major aperture, meters in size. You use inflatable, or you use an inflatable antenna to make an even bigger sail by inflation, and then you use coherent lasers instead of microwaves to get the wavelength down, so you can get a really tightly focused beam going back to Earth. All of this argues for the use of lasers. Now, the next problem you think about is, well, you're going to hit this sail with the beam. How come the sail is going to stay on the beam? Well, maybe it won't. But there is a potential solution that Greg and I studied back in the early part of the century, And it looks like this. It's a conical beam rider. This is a carbon-carbon lattice that's extremely light, a few grams per square meter. And in fact, it's so light that you can see through it. And if you drop it, it floats very slowly to the ground. It's very, very light substance. And when I discovered that a guy in San Diego had figured out how to make these at extremely low mass density, mass meaning mass per square foot or square meter, I proposed to NASA that we try to demonstrate the flight of sails, which had never been done. It's only a concept, Bob Forward's concept. And I figured out at JPL, they have this Klystron, 10,000 watts. And so we got to funding and we built this device. Let me just show you this one first. Here's the chamber. You bring microwaves in with a waveguide. This is a vacuum chamber. You can walk into it. Very low pressure. Here's an absorber up above so that the microwaves that pass beyond the sail are absorbed. And here is the launcher, untapered waveguide. We used a 3 centimeter X-band radiation with about 1/10 of a second to a 1/2 a second. And we used 2 to 10 kilowatts of power. And we wanted to launch sails vertically. Now, what's the impediment to that? Well, it's called gravity. You have to reach 1G to move at all. So there's a certain kind of threshold of power you require in order to have that happen. And you might say, well, why make it out of graphite? You can make a very thin sheet of aluminum. I'll tell you why. Because even though aluminum will absorb very little of microwave or laser, very, very little, it's highly reflective, it has a very low melt pressure, melt temperature. By the time you reach enough acceleration, which is G's, to lift off, you'll melt the aluminum. So you can't fly aluminum sails. You have to find something better. So we did it, and this was the result. Here's a video. This is 10 milliseconds in between. Here's the T equals 0. You see, here's the tip of the waveguide. There is a sail, a graphite sail. In that 30 milliseconds into the microwaves, you see it lights up because it absorbs a fraction of the energy, a few percent. Then it begins to lift off, and then it's gone. Bounces off the ceiling. First flight of sail. And I've been pushing this matter ever since. And at about that time, I was a very happy guy. Used to wear ties, you could talk to NASA. And Greg and I, onto large scale. Mike, how do I get back? I think I would figure it out.
Slide. And then if you scroll, what, you guys like a video on the next slide or something?
No, I just tapped it in, so I don't know, somehow it enlarged the screen. Larger.
That's okay.
Let's just go back to the usual display, yeah.
And then this
slide. Okay, Greg and I publicized this a lot and produced this book called Starship Century, supporting the claim that this is the century we'll build the first starships. And I think it's true. It was very successful. We sold the revenue from it $60,000. We get 40%. And so this is the symposium at UC San Diego, where it all started, that we did in 2013. So at that point, I was approaching, I had already passed, let's see, 2008, I tried to retire again. Didn't work, okay. 2013, I decided, I set a deadline. I'm going to clear up all my backlog. I'm going to retire in 2016. 2016 comes, I get a phone call from a guy named Brigadier Pete Warden, who had just left being in charge of NASA Ames in the Bay Area. And he was working for a guy named Yuri Milner. And who is Yuri Milner? He's a Silicon Valley billionaire. And Yuri Milner wanted to send probes here. And this is in part a result of the flight of sails in 2000. So So much for my third retirement. Maybe an offer I couldn't refuse. It said, we'll just pay you a stipend. And when we ask you to do something, do it. If we don't ask you, we'll pay you anyway. What a deal. And they're slow. I don't hear from them as often as I should, really. But this is Alpha Centauri, and this is the next target. Since we've been to all the planets and we're exploring the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud in the next decade or two, this is the next target. Now, not many people actually know that Alpha Centauri is a double star. Two stars that are almost alike, older than the Earth by a bit, same sort of class, roughly the same mass as the Sun, and they have a life zone in them, and we don't know if we have any planets there yet. And part of that is that they orbit around each other in an ellipse. And we happen to be in a very bad spot right now because they're right on top of each other, and we can't see the deflections of planets caused by planets very easily. They're interfering with our vision. But that will change in a few years. Their separation is about 11 AU, which is about the distance from the Sun to Neptune. So they're very tightly bound, and where there is a stable region where planets can exist, interesting thing is that there is no state. If you think that the big planets like Jupiter and Saturn are on the outside, those regions are not stable in the Alpha system. So there won't be any big planets out there. But they could be planets in these two outer zones. These are not actually the closest stars. The closest star is Proxima Centauri, which is about a quarter of a light.
It's the sun.
Well, yeah, we don't think it's a star, but we're not going there. Yeah, it's like the old Soviet joke. We're going to launch a mission to the sun, but you can't go to the sun. Oh, of course we can. We'll go at night. So in any case, Proxima Centauri is a quarter of a light year closer, but it's a dwarf, and it has dwarf flares. And although we now know there's a planet around it, it's probably lethal for life at that location. It's too rough an environment. So Yuri hired me to work on the Starshot project. The funding level for the project is $10 million a year. We have 10 years to figure out how to send a sail to Alpha Centauri. The constraint on it is that we've got to do it within Yuri's lifetime. I'm not kidding. He wants that sets. We said, well, what does that mean? He said, you got to go 2/10 of the speed of light. Now, if you remember the former slide, 2/10 of the speed of light is thousands of times the velocity we've ever achieved before. It's a big deal. But $10 million a year is a big amount. And he gave us 10 years to figure it out. That was 3 years ago. And I think what's emerged is that we think we can probably figure out how to do it. We got a lot of work to do, but there aren't any physics obstacles. There's engineering and there's cost. The other constraint he put on it is, I don't want to spend a lot of money. It's got to be the beamer, everything's got to be less than $10 billion. So it's bigger than the Corflu budget, but it actually is a lot of money. But he has a good friend who's his number 2 on this project, who stands on the side. His name is Mark Zuckerberg. He's the co-director, and he has friends like Elon Musk and Sergey Brin and people like that. He has a feeling he could get to 10 million. He's got 6 million of his own. 6 billion of his own. So that's the constraint on Starshot. So how are we doing? What are the issues? That's the next few slides. The first thing you think about is, how are we going to keep the sail on the beam? Well, the first thing you think about is, it occurred to us as soon as we started doing our flight experiments, you make a cone, like I showed you. You make a cone because whenever it would tilt, the beam, the forces would make it move back to the center. So there's a restoring force that makes the sail stay on top of the beam. And you don't have to tell it what to do because you don't have time to tell it what to do. Even at the speed of light, you can't tell it to get back on the beam because by that time it's 100,000 miles away. So how do you do that? That is the topic of study. We don't know that there's really a good answer, but we're starting to be rather optimistic. Here are two suggestions. One is to use a hollow beam like this. This is the beam profile. And you put the beam, you make the sail into a sphere, not a cone. And this sphere will bounce around inside this, essentially a potential well, bounce off the walls, and stay stable on the beam. That's the good news. The bad news is that 80% of the beam is outside the domain of hitting the sail. It provides restoring force only when it gets off center, and therefore you have to multiply the power of the beam by a factor of 5 to compensate for that. So that's an idea that will probably work, but it's not attractive. Another way to do it is using very modern techniques, and it's not generally known in society that huge advances have been made in materials so that we know how to manufacture on the very small micron scale objects which have very particular optical properties, such as this. You can have a spherical object like that sail that responds to many, many perturbations because of the way it's configured. And in fact, let me show you what I mean by that. This is called a metamaterial. This is what the material would look like. Okay, it's a lattice, and this is silicon dioxide. The lattice is on the scale of microns. You see the distance here? D up here is a half a micron. A micron is roughly the wavelength of visible light. So this is extremely small scale. You couldn't see it. You couldn't see the scale. But this stuff this material interacts with the electromagnetic waves coming in, the laser in this case. And this is, as a function of wavelength in microns, the transmission through it, the reflection from it, and the absorption in it, okay, T, R, and A. So out here, you would have perfect reflection, which is what you want. You don't want to absorb any of it or you just burn the sail. And at the same time, you can have very low absorption, same point, and essentially no transmission if you go off to the sides here. So there's a domain where you can get essentially perfect reflection because of this lattice, perfect reflection, no absorption, and so no heating, and no transmission. It's the ideal case. It seems like this is something we can build, and we can make these materials in such a way, it's a little hard to describe in a sentence, in such a way that the material will react to the beam in such a way as to help stabilize the sail. So the sail shape can help make you stable, and the sail material can help make it stable. So we're beginning to think that we know how to solve the stability problem. So I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to be able to launch these sails. But there are problems on the way. There is what I think of as the fearless Fosdick effect. Remember fearless Fosdick? Yeah. The guy that they would shoot holes through him and he'd keep running. That's what's going to happen to the sail. Because there's dust in the interstellar medium, it's going to go right through. Blow a hole right through, but it's only about the size of the grain of dust or the atom. And so it is possible that the design will be influenced by dust collision, and the way you do this, say a 1 micron dust produces a 1.5 micron hole. That's not very big when your sail is 5 meters in diameter. A micron, a millionth of a meter, is really nothing. However, there's a lot of dust. There's not as much dust as you might think, actually, because we're actually in a void that was produced long ago by a supernova. We happen to be passing through this void, and there's very little dust in the region around the solar system and the nearby stars. That's fortunate for us. But it appears that the way to really solve the problem of dust damage is to distribute the entire payload electronically into a circuit that has great redundancy. You don't have a lump payload, it's just going to get hit and you're out of business. You want to distribute the payload electrically, and it's almost always electrical circuits of various kinds. And that are basically the detectors and the cameras that you're going to use when you get there. And you distribute it so that it's less and less vulnerable to dust damage. But I should point out that the whole secret, the great value of the beamed power approach is that you leave the beamer at home. So tomorrow you can launch another one, and the next day, and the next day, until you just send a fleet of these. Some of them will get damaged, some of them will miss because it's a long way, and each one will carry only one specific diagnostic at one specific pole, and you just keep shooting them at your target star, and you put a whole fleet through this system. And some people have said, if there's an alien civilization there, won't they see that as an invasion? The answer is no, because if they're sitting on a planet with an atmosphere, this diaphanous sailcraft, I call them sailcraft, which weighs maybe 10 grams, like the mass of 10 sugar cubes, it's going to burn up in the atmosphere in no time if it hits the planet. You only get data if it flies by and takes photographs, or takes magnetic field or particle information, and various other diagnostics. So that's basically the way this thing looks. It looks like there are potential solutions. So what are we going to do about it? This sort of thing. This is a concept that we're working on now for a sail flight chamber to assess the acceleration stability experimentally. Remember, I'm an experimentalist. I'm interested in finding out what nature tells us, not what we can calculate from what we already know, because nature knows best. So the idea is you have a vacuum chamber here, and you fly this sail, accelerate it, and you measure everything you can about it, which is very sophisticated diagnostics these days. In vacuum, you measure the position, velocity vector components, acceleration, orientation, imagery, induced instabilities can be tracked in real time. And behind here, this is the equation, okay? I see that in this projection, you can't see the equation much. This is Newton's first law. So there go to your $10. Here's acceleration. Newton's first law is F equals ma. Force equals mass times acceleration. Or acceleration equals force divided by mass. Okay, so here's the acceleration on the left. Here's the power divided by the mass, P over m, times the reflectivity. And the only other thing, of course, is gravity. Gravity keeps you down. If you don't have any power, you're not going anywhere. So here's basically the acceleration from the beam minus gravity equals the acceleration. That's what this experiment would be like. The elements of a Starship sail test facility are like this. You have a vacuum chamber like this. You have beamer sources and controls, an expandable horizontal chamber, because once we get stability solved in a vertical experiment, we're going to shoot horizontally because the beam will keep the sail on the beam sail interaction will keep it that way. We'll go to very high accelerations over long distances, like hundreds of meters and kilometers, to reach really high velocities. But of course, the thing we really want to reach is very high accelerations, not the velocities, because in the laboratory, the key question is, what kind of acceleration will the sail survive? After all, we're talking about something like 30,000 meters per second, 30,000 Gs. Think about that. The Apollo spacecraft lifted off at something like 3-4 Gs. That was the acceleration. Hard to take for us. But artillery works, and artillery these days has very smart components in it. It can actually steer itself and use GPS after surviving 30,000 Gs of acceleration. So it is possible for instrumentation to survive high acceleration. But in an artillery, this acceleration occurs over a time scale of a millisecond. In Starshot, it's going to be seconds to minutes. That's why we have to demonstrate high acceleration in the laboratory, because that's a new regime. So, in conclusion, well, in the beginning of conclusion, no consensus has been reached on the most suitable geometry for stable flight, but we're pretty sure we can find one. Sail material choices abound, and the requirements are really daunting, but we think we can solve that issue. We're going to have to develop codes and test facilities, and we are very hopeful that we're going to be able to figure out how to build the first starships. And so in real conclusion, think back 60 years ago. If I had known that I would be talking to a bunch of fans about how I'm working on trying to figure out to build starships, I would have been a very happy guy. That's all I have.
Questions, from Jim?
Jim?
Yeah.
What is Yuri's primary goal in sponsoring this, this project, and what was it that inspired him to start it in the first place?
I should say, the Breakthrough Foundation has a major objective, and this is one of the programs. Yuri wants to find out if there's other life in the universe. He wants to do that. He was born on the day of Yuri Gagarin's flight, and they named him Yuri. And he thinks that that's the drum roll of history. The other programs are Watch, which is looking at the nearby stars and trying to figure out where their planets around them. Listen, which is a SETI listening program, which is listening to the stars on a scale that's never been done before, $10 million a year, and taking in petabytes of information. And the problem is not that they can't get data, but that they can't even analyze it yet. And there is another program that's coming along about whether or not how would we formulate a message if we wanted to respond to SETI. So that's his objective, to find out, is there life and civilization elsewhere?
He's asking the basic questions that every human has ever wanted to know.
Yeah, I mean, he's going for the big time.
All right.
If you have a sail that's being speeded up by a laser, how do you get a laser at the other end to slow it back down again?
Well, you have to go there and build it.
Oh, no.
So that's why it's a flyby.
Right.
I mean, basically, what you might think of this way: the sails, after initial exploration of nearby stars, will be looking for where to put the first colony.
Yeah.
And then you'll build a beamer at the other end.
Right.
Your brother talked about how fanzines taught him how to write and got his career started. How did fanzines help you with your career?
Thank you for that question, because I did want to say that my experience in fanzines was really helpful to me in the research industry. People were amazed that I could publish. I could put out a proposal that was perfect. I could put out a report that nobody could find a flaw in. The other people, they didn't know how to write, they didn't know how to edit, they didn't know how to make something, you know, how a magazine was done. It's like watching a film where they put a bullet through a light bulb and it goes like this, and then they run it backwards. It goes here. That's what putting a fanzine is like. Okay, I knew how to do that from Void, and they were just amazed that somebody knew how to do such a thing. That's how it helped me. But that's one way. But it also, frankly, it gave me a feeling of unjustified self-confidence, which I keep to this day.
Jim, thank you so much. We really enjoyed it. Wonderful presentation. We actually learned something at Corflu, which I believe, if not at first, is definitely unusual. There will be a quiz. And, you know, we will be able to award continuing education credit, you know, and university credit with, you know, proper.
And the grading curve is going to be really extreme.
There you go. This, with like one more last word in here, is just about the end of the formal programming and the formal ceremonies associated with Corflu 36, but the fun will continue back in the con suite, and because we are not yet out of beer. My attempt to open up this room after the event for cards and games got an overwhelming response of 0. That being said, if somebody wants it, we will set it up. If we are going to continue with that pattern, we'll just say go ahead and goodbye. And so thank you all again very much. We will continue later. I'm sorry. Oh, I thought this was going to be the last Corflu. No, site selection is coming up. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Well, before we get into that business, just one moment. I want to say something about Mike Dobson. He has worked his butt off the past year I know this, I think, more than most anybody except his wife. He has tried some non-traditional tactics and maneuvers to get this Corflu here, but I think you will all agree with me that the results are impressive and well worth it. And I think he's going to bid. So, Corflu 37 site selection. Are there any bids besides the one I'm about to present?
The Mar-a-Lago bid is now withdrawn.
Withdrawn? Well, there goes that. Well, I'm not involved directly in the Corflu 37 bid prospectus I'm about to read to you, but it is a bid for College Station, Texas. They propose to have it in May 2020. They want to call it Corflu Heat Wave, and I think in Texas that's a very good good name to pull. The responsible parties of the matter are Mr. Pablo Miguel Alberto Vasquez, we all know him as Pablo, and John Purcell. They're the co-chairs of the event. David Thayer is involved with publications. John notes most likely here. Brad Foster is involved with artwork for the publications. I think John mentioned last night to me in an email that Brad's agreed to do a t-shirt design for the Corflu Heatwave event. Valerie Purcell, John's wife, and Diane Thayer will Ramrod Hospitality. Pat Verzi and Jeremy Brett are on board. He says, I do have some ideas for what they can do for us. That should fill you with terror, Pat. John has published a 4-page prospectus. My gosh, it's more like a 6-page prospectus, which he may have imagined I'm going to read to you, but that's just not going to happen. So we made copies. Pat has several copies back there. Should you approve of this bid, Pat is prepared to start accepting pre-supporting and attending memberships. I guess I should just say supporting and attending memberships immediately. John has lots of things here. I just noted a few of them. John says, people keep asking me, are you crazy, Purcell? I can answer that. Yes, he's very crazy, but that may help with running a Corflu. What do you think, Mike?
Oh, yes.
He has no specific date yet. He's concerned about the weather and what the Corflu audience wants out of this proposal. He notes that in May, the temperatures in that area of Texas typically run around 85 degrees in the daytime, 66 at night. You can read all about that in the prospectus here. His target hotel is the Courtyard Marriott in College Station, Texas. 2 good-sized meeting rooms, 2,300 plus square feet. Business center, 24-hour market available, outdoor pool and hot tub, and the usual amenities, I imagine. It's just off Texas State Highway 6 at Rock Prairie Road exit. We all know the Rock Prairie Road right now. Courtyard Marriott, pool, a bar, a restaurant. Well, I can stop right there.
So where is College Station? Where's it close to?
Texas.
Pat, where is College Station close to?
I looked at the prospectus. The closest major city is Houston.
Houston, okay.
And according to the prospectus, the Marriott will run
shuttle buses. Yes, there will be a shuttle service.
I can say a few more things about that. It's nearly midway between Houston, Austin, and Dallas, in the middle of the triangle. The other thing that John has said online is he's also up for looking at the Hilton in the center of College Station, which is more central, has good feedback from Greg Bentley, who stayed there a number of years ago, reports decent hotel. So there are options there.
So he's prepared to pursue those options. He's not locked into May by any means, of course. No. He says here February is possible, June, as late as June is possible, but we can all go into that a bit later. What will the cost be? Well, the regular room rates at this Courtyard Marriott run in the 107 to 129 range. That's pretty much what we're used to here in recent years. Let's see here. Membership rates. He proposes attending membership rates of $50, 40 pounds. Well, you can see the breakdown on the 4th page. Pat Verzi is offered, and John has accepted her generous offer to collect memberships here. I'm just trying to hit the highlights here. Other accommodations are nearby, so there are other inns and places.
I heard rumors that if you join here today, it's $40.
Exactly. River Banquet. And he's confirmed that that's its actual rate.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can only say that that's what
That's a
John,
tremendous bargain.
it does sound like it, that's what John said, so we have to, take that for what it's worth.
Be ready to buy a lot at the auction.
Okay, he's got some programming ideas, you can read about that, of course. And, the big attraction for me is the Sunday afternoon and evening Dead Dog Barbecue Dingo Party at Purcell's house.
Are they barbecuing dingoes?
I'm sure that's exactly what John means, yeah.
Awesome.
And I might as well reveal now that I have accepted John's offer to come down there and teach him how to grill properly. I hope you'll approve his bid because I know John will really benefit from my expertise there. That's about it. So are there no other opposing bids for the Corflu 37 bid selection site?
I move we unanimously accept it.
So moved. I have a show of hands or a whoop and holler. So our next Corflu will be in College Station, Texas, at a date to be determined.
Yeehaw.
Thank you.
And that concludes the official Corflu. Thank you all very, very much.
Luncheon will be open shortly.
Yeah. You have to let Kurt get ahead of you, or there won't be a concert. But as soon as he's up there, it'll be fine.
I said, oh dear.
Oh yeah, John.
Oh, the group photo, I'm sorry. And I'm the one who came up with the idea in the first place. If you don't mind, go up to the that seating area near the next to the front desk. We won't keep you there very long. This will also give Kurt a chance to get ahead of everybody. And we will have the event there.
I'd like to share this with friends. Will this be at a permanent URL somewhere?
Yes. Actually, just discussed with one or two of the people who have that sort of privacy concerns, and we read that these URLs are going to be available on the Corflu.org website.
That I will control.
Okay. How soon can I expect from there?
The way it works.
I've got to get home and put them up on the. I've got the tin to go burn, and I've got a load of old ones to sell to Bill as well. But Bill might be able to do them as soon as he gets home, because I've already sent them to him. He was notifying people online via the various emails and so on. So Bill might be up to. I know it's the first time I've actually put them into OCD
We'll do that.
Okay.
So maybe that was the question you just asked, but I have I'd really like to get, you're going to be posting a copy of this.